So we now begin our first panel discussion, Power in Policy, Turning Commitment into Change. This session will explore how policymaking shapes the prevention and response efforts, highlighting challenges and showcasing effective policy solutions. Please now welcome my esteemed panelists. Jess Asato, MP, elected in 2024. Prior to being elected, Jess was the head of policy and public affairs at the children's charity Barnardo's and worked for the domestic abuse charity Safe Lives and was a political advisor to Tessa Jowell. Jess Asato.
Thank you.
And joining Jess, we have Dame Nicole Jacobs, the Domestic Abuse Commissioner for England and Wales. Since her appointment to the role of Domestic Abuse Commissioner in September 2019, Nicole has begun energetically putting her 30-plus years of experience in domestic abuse, policy and intervention to work, driving improvements to transform the response to domestic abuse in England and Wales. Please welcome Dame Nicole and Jess. Well, I think, Nicole and Jess, we've all been incredibly moved by hearing Mandy's story, and prevention is obviously key. Nicole, I'd like to start with you. Since becoming Domestic Abuse Commissioner, you've overseen major changes in legislation and practice. Looking back, what have been the more significant advances, do you think, in how the UK actually addresses abuse?
Well, I'd love to just begin by saying Jess and I were backstage, but we obviously heard Mandy. Yeah. And I feel she said it all to us, really, in terms of covering every aspect of why this is important, what it really means, where are we, the failures, as well as, I thought she ended in such a beautiful, kind of hopeful way, a real call to action for all of us. I agree with her with so many of those points about the system-induced risks, the kind of failure. I think she used the term administrative risks, or she had some really amazing turn of phrase that I'm going to ask her about and start reflecting myself. But it is true that in many years I have seen, and probably you all have too, just recognizing so many people in the room, you've seen successes over time. I mean, I often do say and remind audiences whenever, anywhere I go, not audiences, meetings, discussions, our first refuges were 50 years ago.
Yes.
And in this role, I've had the privilege of meeting founders of those early refuges often. They're often women in their 80s who came together without any, ability to look towards, a day like today, for example, and who, despite often quite a lot of objection, sometimes some good support locally, but often a lot of objection, a lot of personal cost, and without the ability to connect through social media, often hearing, I think this is happening in London, Leeds, Norwich, or, our early refuges, thinking, well, should we think if we set up a similar service here, people will come.
Yes.
And of course we know, people have come in the thousands and hundreds of thousands. And so there's a lot to reflect on and I do this often when I am frustrated with a lack of momentum or change, is that things have changed. We've seen, I've personally seen a huge change in the more coordinated responses in housing, health, over time. I think since I've been commissioner, I was appointed in very late 2019, and that was part of the Domestic Abuse Act, which did many things. It gave us our first statutory definition. And I don't mean that I think that all progress has been made, but we have had, as Mandy said, in that act, offences of non-fatal strangulation, coercion and controlling behaviour, post-separation, very specific offences, but also I think I really didn't even appreciate at the time having a statutory definition that includes children as victims in their own right, includes economic abuse, for example. That is, when I say I didn't fully understand the impact that would be having on family court. It's not fast enough. It's not, we're not there yet. But I feel there's something about, in the past 5 years in particular, a real expectation among us all that this has to be core business.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, Nicole. And Jess, I just want to ask you, because of course your previous work in the charity sector does give you unique insight into how policy affects families and survivors on the ground level. How does this experience now shape your priorities as an MP, particularly when it comes to closing some of the gaps?
Well, thank you. And just to echo Nicole's thanks to all of the organisers and to all of you for being here today. I guess I want to start with the fact that those conversations that I've had with so many women and children who are survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence are the things that I carry with me into my new role. And actually, while I'm elected, the process of trying to influence doesn't necessarily change. I might have a few more levers. I might have a few fewer levers as well. But I carry their voices. But the other thing that I learned during my time, both within the women's sector in particular, is that those women who support survivors through the horrors that they've been through, often carrying many of their own experiences, also then form the bonds of sistership and solidarity, which is something that I love when I come to events like this. It's like reuniting with my feminist family. That is incredibly powerful and important. And when you talk to those women who were the early founders of the refuge movement, they too speak about the family that they built in order to achieve change. And so I take what I learned from the sector into my role in Parliament, and I hope bring a number of people into Parliament, but I've also made my own relationships with backbenchers from all parties, from my own party, but also trying to bring more male MPs into this. I remember speaking to Jess Phillips when she got elected in 2015 and of course had a career in domestic abuse, and she suddenly became the repository for everybody's constituents who are experiencing domestic abuse. And she used to say, but where are the men MPs? They also have their own victims. What are they doing? Why do they all have to come to me? And so I've been very aware that this is a problem that has to be shared if we're going to fix it. And then the final thing is about knowing that we can make the change. And Nicole has talked about the things that we worked on during the passage of the Domestic Abuse Act. Those changes were very, very hard fought. It feels quite easy to talk about them today because we won them. But they weren't always inevitable, and it did require a huge effort. But in achieving the change, we saw the possibilities. And while there is so much still to do, I think there's a lot to reflect on that we've been able to do together in the last year and a half that shows the progress we've made.
Jess, it's great that you remind all of us that they're hard-fought changes, even though they shouldn't have to be. But thank goodness you did get that through, as you say, in 2019. For both of you, what areas do you think are most in need of urgent policy change? I mean, it is extraordinary, I find, and I don't know if our audience finds this too, but here we are in 2025 and we're still fighting to keep women and girls safe.
Well, I've got an amendment currently in the Victims and Courts Bill, which would create a duty to commission specialist services for women and children affected by domestic abuse and sexual violence. And it also actually brings into its ambit services for children affected by criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation. Because actually what we know is that this is often a continuum. They may be called certain crimes, but they are experienced as a family.
Yeah.
And those
Yes.
vulnerabilities will often come all together. And so separating them out into women or children or exploitation or violence or abuse or coercive control ignores the fact that actually many of these families will be experiencing all. So I would like to see there be a duty so that we don't have the postcode lottery, but also so that we can get the funding that we know, unfortunately, is at a really low ebb at the moment.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that I am most worried about, most upset about. Some of this is to do with the fact that we had a spending review earlier this year, and that money hasn't yet made its way through into departments, and I know just how much our specialist services in the UK are really struggling at the moment.
Yeah.
But a duty like this would avoid that for the future. The other bit that I wanted to just focus on is a campaign that I've had on trying to ban nudification apps. I call these tools of digital sexual assault. That's all they're designed for. 99% of images uploaded to these tools are women and girls. They are not used for anything except for the objectification and the revenge on women. And for me, there is no other use for them. There's no human societal purpose. And so they should be banned. Similarly, I'm really, really pleased that we have got the government to agree to regulate strangulation in pornography. It's one of 3 content regulations that are legal online, but they're illegal offline. So the first one the government has accepted, and that's really exciting. But actually, step incest pornography is legal online. It's disgusting. We have blended families. There is nothing right about it. But also online, you can have pornography that promotes a sexual interest in children, or what I call paedophilic adjacent pornography. We know that this acts as a gateway for men in particular to then pursue child sexual abuse material offline. And of course, this is often mostly girls. And so I would love to see the government act on these 2 other parts of pornographic content regulation. And we'll be keeping pushing in the Lord stages of the Crime and Policing Bill, where Gabby Burton is really leading this, who was the author of the review earlier this year.
Thank you, Jess. And Nicole, how can we sustain this political commitment, prioritising violence against women and girls, prevention across party lines, and as Jess talked about, commitment to financial as well?
Well, I'm so glad Jess talked about the amendment work. I mean, I think you'd all agree she is a true champion. And I know it feels like, and we didn't even mention you have a recall amendment.
Yes. No, there's a lot of amendments I haven't mentioned, but those were the most important ones.
But absolutely, I think it's quite a good way of introducing what you've asked me, which is there's a lot going on. There's still, I think in every conversation I have, it's all about where's the VOG strategy. You know, the government is still yet to publish the violence against women and girls strategy, which is what I would in part answer your question. But we have to kind of also keep our eye on all of the current work, and it is a big challenge to all of us, you know, to keep up with the opportunities that are literally still right in front of us in legislation. There'll be the implementation of the Victim and Prisoners Act, a duty to collaborate on the funding for domestic abuse and sexual violence services. We have to kind of keep up with all of that, which is why we need to work together, communicate with each other, cross-party, definitely. But I guess one of the things that I'm most looking to is the ambition in the strategy that would get us to a more preventative space and in earlier intervention, that breadth of service provision. The biggest gaps, I believe, are for children impacted who are victims of domestic abuse. There's so many gaps in terms of, one of the things I didn't appreciate until I was in this role is some of where you have the intention, but that lack of implementation that Mandy again spoke about is the siloed way government works. And even when you come into government, as this new government has, with the intention of being mission driven, it's very, very hard, because if you've not had the Department of Health and Social Care, for example, or the Department of Education, for example, really bidding in and planning work in these areas, that's why they don't happen, you know. And you have over time the Home Office and the MOJ as departments kind of trying to supplement some of that activity. But what we have to see is this government modeling that true ambition. You know, we need to see for the first time an absolute kind of standard across the whole of government. If we could achieve that, I'm not saying it would be the sustainable every government would do, but it would set a standard that I think we now really are demanding. I think early in my career, I don't know that it was as demanding as it is now. So we have to really come together for that and expect that of this government, and then, you know, drive forward as much progress. And I think with the very specific amendments, with some of the kind of ambitions, that, you know, we could be headed in a direction of activity and that we've not seen before, and that's where we need to be.
Thank you, Nicole. What does accountability look like, do you think, for public agencies tasked with protecting survivors?
Such a great question. At the end of the day, survivors need to be safe, so the best accountability would be the outcomes of those public agencies and creating that safety for, you know, adult victims and child victims. I am quite struck, though, by the sort of systems that we're in, and whether that is within this space of VORG, the mistakes that are made, the opportunities that we see in every single domestic homicide review, where actually agencies have held the picture and nobody takes responsibility or accountability. We have just introduced in the government a new duty of candour. And I have been wondering, actually, Nicole, the extent to which there might be a crossover in that into the VORG space. Because too frequently, there are people who could act, who should act, and who often know that they need to act, but don't. And unfortunately, therefore is, for victims, never any accountability. Nobody ever resigns. Nobody ever says, we got this wrong. Or if they did, there's no visible way of showing that that's happened. So I'm kind of interested in that. Mostly, though, I just think we need to get the system into a place where, you know, we do have that preventative approach, but at the moment, actually the crisis support that we have is crumbling. So for me, it's like we need to stop the flow of victims into the system, but we also have to make sure that the victims who are being harmed today and tomorrow are getting that immediate life-saving support, because without that, we're really, really letting women and their children down. So it's both. But accountability, duty of candour, I'd like to explore it some more. I don't know whether anyone else is interested in that, but it's just dropped out of my pocket.
Don't worry, Jess,
Nicole.
thank you.
Okay.
And how do you think that the UK's policy-making response to violence against women and girls compares with other countries around the world?
If I could be cheeky, I just wanted to say about accountability, because I do think there is something, it all ties together. The more you have the known levers of accountability working, the better. So there's some ways we do that we know, like making sure there's oversight for homicide review actions. There's so much there. The having this specialist support, who are often are the most immediate ways you can have accountability for victims and survivor in the here and the now, and that the diversity and the range of work that is needed there. But I think there's some interesting things we could think about in terms of police forces, 43 forces, health trusts. Like, how do we build a greater expectation of understanding how delivery happens there? And I think we need a lot more transparency there to have and we need accountability of the strategy I've talked about. So we're all desperate to see it. We need to have a really good mechanism in terms of how that's governed. internationally, I mean, I am not an expert. I spend so much of my time and energy here in England and Wales, but I do know often when I am interacting with people from other countries, they're quite interested in our legislation, our coercive and controlling legislation, which we're celebrating a 10-year anniversary of soon, and there are people in the audience who are very involved in marking that. That's quite unique compared to other countries. That being applicable post-separation is very unique. The idea of how we define domestic abuse, full stop, and inclusion of children and economic abuse is very unique. So we have things that we are doing that I think we should be very proud of. There are other countries. I always get this question, which country is the most ahead?
Yes.
But I think it's probably a similar answer is what we would say about England and Wales, which is it's not quite as easy as that, but what you can find are examples of exceptionally good work and practice and legislation. And what we have to do, and this is why No More is wonderful for us in the kind of international exchanges we have, is we have to really be able to kind of lift our head up from what we're doing day to day in our own space and really have that aspiration. So,
and of course, we've got a target to halve org, which I don't think there is any other country in the world that has ever said that they want to halve violence against women and girls. Obviously, the proof will be in whether we can get even halfway there. But having the target can't be underestimated.
Absolutely.
And the fact is that it's in a manifesto, and it's something that I know that the Prime Minister really, really cares about. So that is a very, very exciting opportunity and challenge.
Jess, thank you so much for leaving us with that message of hope. Nicole and Jess, thank you so much for joining us today for this very crucial panel. Thank you. Thank you so much.